Irene is really cute. A voice became clear as the door opened. And then, when Luke said that name, I froze. I wondered who it was, but when I heard the voice, it was indeed Irene, my sister. Luke stupidly called out Irene's name over and over. Shaking, I realized that I had to capture this scene on video. So, I recorded evidence on my smartphone and quietly left the place. After a while, the two came out of the bedroom. Seeing me, they turned pale. I said to them, "Yeah, I sent the video of you two to Ken. Anyway, let's discuss what to do next with the four of us soon." Hearing this, Irene's face turned even paler. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Exactly what it sounds like. I've got the video as evidence." "What the heck have you done?" Irene exclaimed, becoming frantic. As I held up my smartphone, she lunged at me. "My name is Mariana Olsen. I'm a 45-year-old housewife. I have twin sons who are in the 6th grade. My sons are twins. I've heard that twins can be hereditary. As it turns out, I'm also a twin. I have a twin sister named Irene. We are identical twins, but it never really felt like we were sisters. More like rivals. Even if we weren't twins, I always felt compared to Irene while growing up. Eventually, I developed a strong complex towards her, and she seemed to prioritize beating me in everything. Irene was always the cute and friendly child, while I was shy, introverted. And I had a hard time with strangers, which made everyone first drawn to Irene. Despite being rivals, I adored Irene. She was always smiling and popular, something I aspired to be. But Irene apparently didn't feel the same. When we were kids, we often played together, but I always ended up with the unpleasant roles. "Mariana, you're it." During tag, I was always it. Even when a friend suggested rock paper scissors to decide, Irene would pressure me, "You want to do it, right?" Not wanting to be disliked by Irene or left out, I could only nod. Irene's behavior wasn't just during playtime. It was in 6th grade. During the time when roles for the school play were being decided. We were going to do a play of Snow White, but since I didn't think I could act, I wanted to be the narrator. However, I caught a cold and missed school on the day roles were assigned. "Oh, Mariana, you want to be the narrator? I'll tell the teacher." Irene said she would tell the teacher for me, so I trusted her and felt relieved. But when I returned to school after recovering, to my surprise, I found out I was cast as the lead role. "Why am I the main character?" I was shocked and asked a friend. Then, my friend said something unbelievable. Irene said Mariana wanted to be the main character. "What? I didn't say that." "But it's already been decided." It seemed that, entering adolescence in 6th grade, no one wanted to play Snow White due to shyness. So, I, who was absent, was chosen for the role. My usual quiet demeanor led the teacher to wonder why I would want to be the main character. "Did Mariana really say she wanted to do it, Irene?" The teacher double-checked. "Yes, she wants to, but she's too shy to volunteer. Please let her have this chance." But Irene had recommended me for the role as if she was doing me a favor. I cried, pleading that I couldn't do it and didn't want to. However, everyone else's roles were already decided. Scolded by the teacher and parents, I somehow managed to try my best. Thanks to that effort, the play was a great success. The teacher, my parents, and friends all said, "You did great." But Irene was the only one looking at me displeased. "Anyone could have done that. It's silly to get all that praise for something so simple," she would say, speaking harshly. That was the moment I realized Irene disliked me. From then on, Irene stopped inviting me to play. At first, it made me sad, but then I realized I was no longer being forced into unpleasant roles. I made good friends and began to enjoy myself. In middle school, many didn't even know Irene and I were twins. We hardly spoke at school and didn't look alike. I requested not to be in the same class as her, and I was enjoying my time. But one day, as I was studying for exams, Irene came to talk to me. "Are you studying?" "What for?" "For the test, remember? It's tomorrow." Studying that hard is just a waste, you know. Irene always had a way of manipulating me to do what she wanted. But I don't want everything to go Irene's way. For the first time, I talked back to her. I want to keep getting good grades to earn a scholarship for college. How do you know it's impossible? If you don't want to study, Irene, then don't. But don't bother me. I quickly looked away and returned to my textbook. Huh? What's with that attitude towards your sister? Irene, angered at being talked back to, grabbed my textbook and threw it on the floor. What are you doing? Studying won't do you any good, ugly. You're just meant to be my slave. That day, we ended up in a physical fight. Our parents came running at the noise and stopped us, but by then, my textbook was torn to pieces. But more than that, my heart was shattered, hearing Irene's true feelings about me. To her, I was just someone convenient to push unpleasant things onto. I realized clearly that Irene saw me as her slave. But I didn't give up and continued studying. Luckily, my parents contacted the school on my behalf, and I got a new textbook. With their support, Irene stopped disturbing my studies, and I was able to focus. Thus, we became high school students, but we hardly spoke to each other and led our separate school lives, eventually going on to attend different universities. And then, I found employment. As an adult, I started living alone. That's when I met a man. His name was Luke Oliver. Luke and I were hired at the same time and came from similar backgrounds. Feeling a sense of kinship, we began to see each other and he asked me out. Actually, I like you, Mariana. I would be happy if we could date. I was stunned to hear those words. I had feelings for Luke too. But I never had the courage to say such things. I wasn't pretty like Irene and had hardly any experience with love during my school years, so I couldn't believe that he felt the same way about me. I'm happy. If you're okay with me, then I'd love to. I felt over the moon to have my first boyfriend. Since starting to date Luke, I devoted myself to him, cooking meals and making lunchboxes. Luke also started visiting my place often, and we began living almost like we were cohabiting. Mariana, I'll cook dinner today. But it wasn't just me doing things for him. Luke was also cooperative with household chores. Doing chores together was fun, and I started to think that Luke and I could make a good married couple. After 3 years of dating, we decided to get married. I was very happy and excited about it, but there was one thing that worried me. Mariana, you're a twin, right? I'd like to meet your sister, Luke said one day. During our 3 years of dating, I had told him I had a twin sister, Irene, but he had never met her. In fact, I hadn't even told Irene about having a boyfriend. Since that big fight in middle school, there had been a deep rift between us. Yeah, that's right. But as we were getting married, it was inevitable that Irene and Luke would meet. I felt uneasy thinking about how Irene might scorn me, but I decided it was time to introduce them. Huh? Married? Since when? Irene exclaimed loudly on the phone when I called her after a long time. I had told our parents, but apparently she hadn't heard yet. It seemed like this was the first time she's hearing about it. Yeah, and I want to introduce you to the man I'm going to marry. I'm kinda busy, you know? Well, if you insist, I guess I can meet him. As usual, Irene was condescending, but I asked her to make time. Irene hadn't changed since we were kids. So I thought I'd have to be the grown-up and accommodate her. We scheduled our visit home to match Irene's day off. Luke suggested that since we were all together, we should have a meal with our parents, so we arranged to meet at a restaurant. On the day, we went to the restaurant. But even when the time came, Irene was nowhere to be seen. Irene is late. She said she'd be on time. Sorry, Luke. It's totally fine. She'll probably be here soon. Let's wait a bit. Both my parents and I felt sorry for Luke. Then, 15 minutes past the agreed time, Irene arrived in a flashy dress. Sorry, did you wait? We did wait. And what's with that outfit? Well, it's kind of like a meet and greet, right? I thought I should dress up. I was just dumbfounded at her. Not just me. Even our parents could only give a wry smile. If she knew it was a meet and greet, I wish she hadn't been late without even a message. Especially if the reason was just to dress up. It wasn't very mature. But, since it was a special occasion, I held back my feelings. Then, Irene, Luke, and I introduced ourselves to each other. Mariana caught a handsome one. You work at the same place, so he must be making good money, right? Irene kept making rude remarks to Luke, who was meeting her for the first time. What do you do on your days off? With Mariana, I mean, before you started dating Mariana. Furthermore, Irene grilled Luke with questions like it was some kind of group date. My parents tried to stop her multiple times, but she wouldn't quit, saying, "It's fine. I just want to know what kind of person Mariana's husband will be." Luke kept up with her, assuring me, "Don't worry about it." By the end of the dinner, I was exhausted and couldn't help but sigh. But that wasn't the end of it. Irene is an interesting person, huh? She's the complete opposite of Mariana. I always thought we were quite the Una-like twins. I replied with a wry smile. Then, Luke said something that caught me off guard. Maybe you should take a page out of Irene's book? She's always smiling, great at conversation, and cute. If I'd met her first, who knows, huh? I was taken aback. I had told him about my difficulties with Irene. Shocked more than angry by his comment, I retorted. Then why don't you marry Irene? She said you were handsome too. He quickly apologized, seeming flustered. Sorry. It was just a joke. I'm glad I met you, Mariana, and I don't have any special feelings for Irene. Then you shouldn't make comments that put me down and praise Irene. I said it was a joke. Luke apologized again. I was shocked, but I didn't plan to call off our engagement over this. As long as he understood, that was fine. But then he said, "But Irene is a nice girl. It's shameful to be jealous of your sister, you know? We should all get along as a family. She's an adult now, it's different from the past." I had my reservations, but I knew our parents really wanted Irene and me to get along. However, I wished Luke would take my side more. Why did he try to bring me and Irene closer? But then again, it's not like there will be many opportunities for involvement anyway. But I didn't want to argue, so I just nodded to his words. A few days later, a message from Irene arrived. Luke is too good for you. Should I take him? I was horrified by her message. What are you talking about? I replied, only to receive a call from her immediately. Exactly what I said. It's unbelievable that someone dull like you is getting married before me. She mocked me over the phone, laughing. He's high-earning and well-educated. Hand him over to me. We're twins, after all, we've always shared everything. Don't be ridiculous! I shouted at her. I couldn't tolerate her treating Luke like an object, and her claim about sharing was absurd. I'd always been the one to take on the unpleasant tasks for Irene. That night, I told Luke about the conversation and warned him to be careful around Irene. But he seemed pleased and laughed off my words. I'm flattered she liked me so much. Don't worry, she's not serious. It's not a laughing matter. You never know what Irene might do. Do you doubt my feelings? If I say it's okay, then it's okay. Luke said. Despite being such a wonderful person, it seemed like he had changed after meeting Irene. He affirmed everything about her, just because she was my sister. Aside from that, he remained the wonderful partner he always was. But my dissatisfaction grew whenever Irene was involved. You don't need to worry so much. But as Luke said, as long as he didn't sway, there was nothing Irene could do. I realized that being disturbed by her words meant I didn't fully trust Luke. Indeed, I was admonished like that. It was certainly true. So, I decided to trust Luke and ignore Irene's words. Even though Irene continued to send me snide messages, I chose not to respond. Fortunately, Irene didn't do anything to Luke and me, and I prayed for a happy married life with him. Years later, when I was over 40, my parents informed me that Irene had gotten married. By then, I had blocked her number and we weren't in contact. We occasionally saw each other at our parents' house, but every time I met Irene, she berated me. Nearing 40 and still unmarried, Irene seemed to take her frustrations out on me, and it appeared she was avoiding me. Given her age and, more importantly, her difficult personality, Irene faces challenges. I thought Irene might never marry, but she found someone and I was genuinely happy for her. I realized how awful I was to Mariana when she got married, after I got married myself. Irene apologized through our parents. We started communicating again. And Irene had become much calmer. Almost like the sister I used to love. I never thought I'd see the day when we could laugh together again, so I was very happy. Irene introduced me to her husband. He was about 5 years older than us, named Ken Green. He seemed to really care for Irene, which was reassuring. Now that both of us were married, Irene and I grew closer. Our parents were very happy to see us getting along. I wanted to make up for the time we had been distant. Several more years passed, and one day, I felt sick at work and decided to go home early. Luke was out on a business trip, so I left a message with a colleague. I returned straight home. When I got home and entered the house, I immediately sensed something was off. It felt like someone was inside, even though the house should have been empty. Could it be a burglar? With that thought, I quietly entered the house. Listening carefully, I heard sounds and voices coming from the bedroom. Holding my breath, I stood in front of the bedroom door. Inside, I heard Luke's voice. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. The voice drained the blood from my face. It was unmistakably the sound of something intimate happening. Moreover, there was the creaking of the bed. Even without looking inside, it was clear what was happening, and my hands trembled. However, if Luke was cheating, I had to catch him in the act. With my smartphone in hand, I quietly opened the door, trying not to be noticed. But what I saw in the bedroom was an even more shocking truth. "Irene, you are really cute." A voice became clear as the door opened. Luke's voice uttering that name made me freeze. Thinking about it, the female voice was indeed Irene, my sister. Luke stupidly repeated Irene's name. Trembling, I captured the scene on video and quietly left. I sat in the dining room for a while, stunned. I was supposed to have left work early because I was feeling unwell, but the shock made me forget all about it. In a daze, I just sat there with my smartphone, waiting for this nightmare to end. Then, a few minutes later, the bedroom door opened. "Okay, I'm heading back to work." "Lock the house, okay?" "All right." "Can't wait to live together soon." Hearing this, I quickly stood up. Luke and Irene noticed the noise in the hallway and our eyes met. "Mariana! Why are you here?" Luke exclaimed, turning pale. "Why am I here? This is my house, right? More importantly, why is Irene here? Aren't you both supposed to be at work?" Irene hesitated for a moment, then smirked defiantly. "Why? You knew, right? Do you want me to spell it out?" "Irene!" Luke tried to stop her, but Irene was relentless. "I've always hated how you look down on me. Happiness and Luke don't suit you at all. I'll take them all for myself." Then, she said those words defiantly. I just smiled. "Okay. Then I'll give you Luke." "Mariana! But don't think you can take my happiness away." Annoyed by my response, Irene glared at me. I continued, addressing her directly. "Yeah, I sent the video of you two to Ken. Anyway, let's discuss what to do next with the four of us soon." As I said this, Irene's face turned deathly pale. "What? What do you mean?" "Exactly what it sounds like. If you want Luke, then Ken should know about this too, right?" "What have you done?" Irene became nearly hysterical, lunging at me. "Calm down, Irene! How can I calm down?" Luke tried to intervene and stop Irene. But she was beyond reasoning. At that moment, Irene's phone in her bag rang. She froze at the sound. "Oh, isn't that a call from Ken?" Irene, pale-faced, hesitantly looked at her bag. But made no move to answer. The sound of the phone echoed in the quiet room. After a while, it stopped and then my phone rang. See? Irene didn't answer, so he's calling me now. Mariana! I'm really sorry. Please forgive Irene. Please put in a good word with Ken. If not, Irene will lose everything. Luke, for some reason, began defending Irene. Irene started crying miserably next to him. She was acting like a tragic heroine. What Luke said made sense. Actually, Ken was Irene's husband and also the president of the company she worked for. If her infidelity was revealed, divorce and losing her job were possibilities. Especially since it's working hours now. But I had no sympathy. She knew the consequences when she did it, right? I can't possibly vouch for her. I responded. That's too harsh. Luke said, still trying to defend Irene. Annoyed by his words, I glared at him. You're worried about her? Think again. It's not just Irene who's going to lose her family and job. At my shout, Luke flinched. He started sweating. Maybe he realized the meaning of my words. Just so you know, I've sent the video to your department's email address at work too. What have you done? The call from Ken had already ended. Luke and Irene stood there, still with looks of despair on their faces. After kicking both of them out of the house, I called Ken. Sorry to bother you during work. It's about the video, right? Yeah. He is Luke, isn't he? Yes. I replied quietly to Ken's gentle voice. I'm sorry. I asked for this. He said. Actually, Ken had confided in me that something seemed off with Irene. The old Irene might have done something like this, but I believed the current Irene truly loved Ken. I didn't think she would cheat, and I had told Ken as much. But he had asked me to gather evidence if Irene ever did something wrong. That's why I think I was able to film calmly. Please don't apologize. I'm glad I could capture Luke's infidelity. If you hadn't asked me, I probably wouldn't have thought to stay calm and do such a thing. I told Ken. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't shocked. It's devastating enough to discover infidelity, let alone with one's own sister. I was the one who wanted to be hysterical. My sons will be home soon, so let's talk another day. I told Ken and ended the call. Tears streamed down my face, but for my sons and for my future, I knew I had to be strong. I went through the day as usual. And when my sons had settled down for the night, Luke came home. You're late. Were you with Irene? I asked. Luke, clearly upset, snapped back at me. Because of you, I got called into HR. They're going to decide my punishment later. What are you going to do about it? I couldn't help but laugh at Luke, trying to make me the villain for his own actions. It was a waste to have cried over such a person. Nothing. Do whatever you want. Do you understand? If we divorce, I'm taking the kids. Are you still going to divorce me? Luke's statement, using our sons as leverage, only made me more contemptuous. What are you talking about? You think you'll get custody after likely losing your job? The divorce is final. Don't be ridiculous. Keep the foolishness to your actions only. Luke was speechless, as expected. Of course. Infidelity during work hours at our home, such a person would undoubtedly face dismissal. He still didn't seem to grasp the foolishness of his actions. If that's the case, he's incredibly foolish. I'm moving out tomorrow. Wait. We can still work this out. It was just one affair, forgive me. Luke, facing my firm stance, started to beg and apologize. Just once. I asked back. According to Ken, Irene had been acting strangely for several months. Ken is mostly out on sales visits, so it was entirely possible he had been coming back to our house during the day. Just once. Luke's weak reply to my question. His eyes were evasive. His lack of confidence in his answer made it clear it wasn't just once. Pursuing it further felt pointless, so I ended the conversation. The next day, I told my sons about Luke's infidelity. They are already in the 6th grade of elementary school. They should understand that hurting and betraying others is wrong. They asked for some time alone to talk and went to their room. Shortly after, they came out with their bags and said, "Mom, we're on your side." I couldn't help but cry. They comforted me with smiles, even as I apologized again. Then, we moved back to my parents' house. My parents were speechless when they heard about Irene and Luke's actions. They had been happy that Irene and I had become close again. My mom, in tears, apologized, saying, "Irene hasn't changed after all. I'm sorry for always making you endure." Cut ties with both Irene and Luke. We'll keep minimal contact with Irene, my dad said, which was a relief to me. From that day, I started commuting to work from my parents' house. Luke was apparently under temporary suspension from work and kept calling me, but I ignored him. Eventually, he began sending messages day and night. "I love you, Mariana. Let's live together happily as a family of 4 again." I was wrong. I was just deceived by that woman. I don't know how to live without you. I was almost fooled for a moment, but my son's laughter at the messages helped me see their ridiculousness. However, ignoring him wasn't a long-term solution. Eventually, I had to meet him for the divorce papers. I arranged to meet Luke at a cafe on the weekend. Deciding to meet at the cafe instead of meeting at home was based on Ken's advice. He mentioned that it's better to have discussions in a public place where there are other people around, as it helps in keeping the conversation calm. When Ken and Irene also gathered at the cafe, I noticed that Irene had become gaunt and looked almost like a different person in just a few days. She must have been rejected by Ken. Serves her right. Now, Irene and Luke, please submit the divorce papers. Irene seemed reluctant to divorce. Ken spoke to the two who were refusing divorce. "Ken, it's a misunderstanding. It's your choice to divorce, but we are not getting a divorce." "Still saying that? My sons and I no longer consider you family," I told the persistently denying Luke. Ken sighed deeply. "We can go to court, but it's clear you both will lose. Adding legal fees to the alimony, won't it become a huge burden for you?" "Alimony? Of course. You both betrayed your families. Irene, you betrayed me and Mariana. Luke, you betrayed Mariana and me. You'll have to pay a fair amount in alimony." Irene started trembling silently. Her silence and gauntness now made sense. This was the reason. "How can I pay? I might lose my job." Luke stammered in protest. "You brought this on yourself. Besides, you'll also have to pay child support for both kids." "Oh, that's right. Irene," I chimed in, making Irene flinch. "You wanted to live together, right? You can get married and live in that house." I laughed loudly. "Don't forget the mortgage." Luke seemed to suddenly remember about it. He probably forgot about the existence of the mortgage. Both of them sat silently in front of the divorce papers, sweating profusely and looking pale. Afterward, with a lawyer introduced by Ken, I successfully filed for alimony and child support and got divorced. Despite his initial resistance to divorce, Luke quickly proposed to Irene after our divorce was finalized. I knew he had always been fond of Irene. When did their affair turn serious? Hearing this, I felt utterly pathetic. Meanwhile, Irene, genuinely in love with Ken, the president of her company, was dumped and, as expected, lost her job. Why did she get involved with Luke despite her love for Ken? Left with lingering questions, I asked Ken. He hesitantly revealed. "Actually, for several months, she's been complaining about you, Mariana." "What?" "Saying things like, she's useless but got married and even has kids. Such luxury." Could it really be for such a reason? It made sense, considering Irene's character. But the idea of her going to such lengths just to harm me was chilling. "I consulted you because I was worried she might harm you. But I never imagined she'd end up with Luke like this. I'm really sorry." Ken apologized, looking regretful. "It's okay. It's over now. And Luke is to blame too for falling for her." And with that, the discussion ended. Ken and I agreed to keep in touch for ongoing alimony and legal consultations. According to him, the two, burdened with a hefty alimony, ended up marrying and living together. Irene was disowned by her parents and had nowhere else to go. With no family left, she reluctantly accepted Luke's proposal. From what the lawyer told me, Irene couldn't accept that she was forced to divorce Ken and marry Luke, whom she didn't love, and she blamed me for it. The lawyer chuckled bitterly, saying that every time he called, he was greeted with Irene's verbal abuse. Though I felt sorry for him, Ken's presence meant he continued to support me diligently. It seemed I would still need his assistance for a while to ensure alimony payments. 5 years later. The alimony and child support payments were being made properly, and my emotional wounds had mostly healed. On a day when life seemed to have returned to normal, I received a call from the lawyer. Irene says she needs to talk to you. I refused. Whatever she had to say, it would likely just be an outburst of abuse, using me as a stress-relieving punching bag. I would never trust or forgive Irene again. I asked the lawyer to convey my refusal. However, Irene insisted it was urgent, and even Luke pleaded with me to meet. Their persistence wore me down, and I reluctantly agreed. But I didn't have the courage to meet them alone, so, feeling a bit guilty, I contacted Ken after a long time. He graciously agreed to accompany me, and so I met with Irene and Luke after a long time. They sat solemnly at the cafe where we had agreed to meet. Irene's face lit up slightly with relief when she saw me. "What do you want? Why did you call me here?" I asked. "Actually, I've developed renal failure and need dialysis," Irene said. I was taken aback. You both are the reason Irene's like this. She can't sleep without drinking, and yet she has to work for the alimony. You've broken her body with your actions." Luke accused me angrily, but I thought it was their own doing. Ken seemed to agree, sighing softly and looking exasperated. "So what? I'm not reducing or refunding the alimony. Be thankful it's even split into installments," I said firmly, and Irene started crying, bowing her head. "I'll pay the alimony. Please, I need a kidney." "What?" I exclaimed at this extreme request. "There's no way I'm giving you one." As I refused, Luke said, "You were born a twin to save Irene. You have a duty to help her." "What are you talking about? Who's always been the one pushing unpleasant things onto me? Did Irene ever help me once? This is no small matter. Irene's life is at stake," Luke shouted angrily. Irene wept and begged, apologizing, while Luke insulted me as being heartless and coercively demanded the transplant. At that moment, when it seemed like they were blaming me, Ken spoke up. "If you need dialysis, then do it. Do you know how hard dialysis is? And do you know how hard transplantation is? Why should she risk her life for Irene?" Ken's words silenced them. I was relieved by Ken's timely intervention and caught my breath. "Besides, Irene, you repeatedly called Mariana useless. Isn't it too convenient to ask for help only when you're in trouble? But that's because, Irene, you destroyed Mariana's happy life. Mariana has no obligation to save Irene's life." Irene broke down crying, and Luke was at a loss for words. They probably thought I would surely give up my kidney. If I had been alone, I might have been persuaded. Ken saved me again. "Well then, take care. Oh, and don't forget this month's payment," I said aloud and left the table. Whether they call me heartless or a devil, I can't forgive them. I don't know what kind of life they'll lead from now on, but I hope they never forget their actions and reflect on them. It seems they both work part-time, and with Irene unable to work properly, their finances are in trouble. But it's karmic retribution. Their actions brought this upon themselves. Their atonement won't end until they properly pay the alimony. I think so. I continue to live happily with my parents and sons. My parents don't even mention Irene's name anymore. However, it seems that they are happy to see their twin grandsons getting along well. I am happy to see that the bond Irene and I couldn't establish seems to exist firmly between my sons. I've kept in touch with Ken. He's a good person, always thoughtful and supportive. He seems to have feelings for me, but I'm not ready to respond yet. I don't want to disturb my sons any further. But in a few years, my sons will become adults. I hope that, in the future, I'll have the opportunity to think about my own happiness again. That's what I'm hoping for.